Before the success stories, the progress, there was you. You who made a choice to grow, to inspire, to overcome your own challenges. At NASM, we're in service of your limitless potential, because when you keep growing, we all get stronger, and we'll never stop making your journey our mission. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified personal trainer.
You're listening to Random Fit with hosts Wendy Batts and Ken Miller, winner of a Gold Markham Award for Digital Media.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Random Fit. I am Wendy Batts, and I'm here with my friend and co-host, as always, Ken Miller. How are you?
I'm good, Wendy. How are you doing?
I am doing excellent. I know this podcast was one of the ones where you're like, we totally need to talk about this. And I'm like, I would love to. I don't have as much experience as you because of where you live and in comparison to where I live. However, it is a really good topic to discuss, especially because we're in the summer months and more people are visiting the beach. So we are going to talk about riding the waves of fitness, ocean-inspired exercise regimens.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, when I grew up in sunny San Diego, California, and what's funny is that I'm in Northern California now, but when I tell people where I grew up, the first question that comes up is, do you surf? And out of my circle of friends, we're about 50-50 on who surfs and who doesn't. And I'm not a regular surfer. I'll go out and I'll battle the waves like everybody else. But I'm not one of those guys that, hey, I got to watch the wave report, or, hey, there was a storm out in Japan, 5 days ago, it's rolling in, so I'm going out to the beach. I wasn't one of those guys, but I can enjoy time on the water just as much as everybody else.
I like to float. I float, I tube, but I have never tried surfing. Now, paddleboarding, yes. Now, I have never paddleboarded in the ocean, but I have on lakes. Same thing I've done a bunch of different types of tubing and jet skiing and those things. So when people say that they can surf, I am in awe, because I know on calm waters in the lake, it can be extremely challenging to have the core strength, balance. And if I had to try to pedal out against the waves to get where I need to be and wait for the one wave to get me on this board to bring me into the beach, I don't know how well I would do.
Yeah,
I think I have all this balance. So I've also seen myself snowboard, so
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of options, and you listed some pretty challenging ones. But let's just go down the list. You and I, we've talked about some water sports that you can do on the beach, but I think what we need to clarify, and this is a conversation I had with my daughter about being on the water and the different things you can do in the water sports wise, because she, both my kids swim, she plays water polo, but it's all in a pool, right? Controlled temperature. There's no waves coming down on you. You don't have to, keep one eye for what you're doing and another eye on the ocean. So very, very contained, controlled environment when you're in a pool. But once you get out into nature, it's a totally different animal, right? Literally a totally different animal from the vantage point that you have to watch out for manta rays or stingrays. You have to watch out for jellyfish. You have to watch out for sharks, all of the above. So, and with that, with the animals, you have just Mother Nature. You have the wind, you have the surf, incoming, outgoing tides, rip currents, and to be in the water when all those things are happening at the same time, you are literally in nature, and you have to physically do what you can. I don't say survive, but there's a lot to contend with out in the ocean that you don't have to contend with, like with you, Wendy, if you're just floating in a pool.
Well, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
they always say, do things smarter, right? Why do things harder when I could be doing things smarter, which is just sitting there like a
Floating's good.
beaked
Floating's
whale.
good.
Just kidding. But when you think about it, one of the reasons I was excited about this topic, and when you said we're going to do this, because you have way more experience in some of these ocean type exercises that we're going to talk about. But I had a client who is from Atlanta and has been going, he just recently retired, sold his company, and they have made this promise to themselves that they were going to start going out to different countries and experience different things. And so they had just gotten back from the ocean and the beach. That was where they've been wanting to go for a long time. And they said, listen, I took up surfing. And I say took up surfing. They took lessons on how to properly surf. And it was him and his friend that went out, and they put him on the starter boards, which you can explain the differences in the surfboards, but they put him on a starter board, and then they started teaching them how to paddle. They had to teach them how to stand. They had to teach them how to get up correctly. And they ended up falling and hurting their backs. They weren't prepared for that kind of thing. They're super strong, but they didn't really. And again, this wasn't I shouldn't say a client of mine. This is a friend of someone that had been working with them, but they didn't train for surfing. And you guys all know, when you start a new exercise, you're super sore. Well, they started a new exercise and they were super sore, and then ended up tweaking something because they just didn't have the right technique to get it done without hurting themselves.
Yeah, I've worked with a handful of guys that specifically wanted to get better for surfing. The first one that comes to mind, Mike, has a place down in Santa Barbara, lives in the Bay Area. So when the waves, literally, when he watches the surf reports, when he sees that there's a storm somewhere in the Pacific and it's about to roll in, he's driving to Santa Barbara to go surfing. And I, training him, he'd tell me, okay, what do I have to do to be a stronger paddler? Because when those waves are bigger, you've got to be a really, really, really strong paddler to get out there, to get past the breaks, and just to make sure you're strong enough to catch the wave. But I think what you're describing, Wendy, was when your friend or your client was popping up from, they catch the wave, now they have to go from laying on the board to pushing off the board and popping up onto their feet. That is a very, very coordinated, powerful movement, right? And it's one where you can get on the wave, but unless you pop up, you're not going to stay on the wave. So that's one of those maneuvers that a lot of surfers, you don't pass. You have to get through that, and you have to be really, really good at it to be a really good surfer. So that powerful movement is one that doesn't really go mentioned, but paddling, being a strong paddler, having the shoulder endurance, the postural endurance, because you're arched up, your chest is up, you're looking at what's coming at you, and you have to paddle from that upright position. Basically, you're extended through that upper spine as you're paddling out. So that's one thing posturally you have to be able to address, especially when it comes to having shoulder issues, shoulder impingement issues, things like that. Because I've seen surfers doing overhead presses, dumbbell overhead presses, and here they are after a set, they're rubbing their shoulder because they've got impingement issues when they haven't, they're trying to get stronger, which is great, but they haven't done the requisite stability training first to get the shoulder cuff in line for them to be powerful when they are trying to put their hand in the water and pull. So
let me ask you this question, Ken, because again, what you're explaining is super, super important. And let's say that you have a client that has pretty good range of motion throughout their shoulder, and let's say posturally they look okay. We know that that's usually not the case, and we have to start from ground zero and work up through the model. But let's say that overall, when you're doing their assessment, they look pretty good. If they were to come to you, and with you explaining exactly that, of what they need to do to paddle out and then to pop up and then to ride in. So let's say those three scenarios. What are some of the exercises that you would do with a client in order to help them become strong paddlers, getting able to get up and that powerful movement, and then obviously having the balance, stability, and control to ride it in?
Well, the first thing is making sure they have the range of motion. Do they have the flexibility? Can they extend and rotate through the spine? That's the first thing. Thoracically, can they do it? And that's not to neglect the core. I mean, a lot of what I'm talking about is relative to the upper body, but deep core work, all my clients, I'm sure all your clients, Wendy, same situation. So just to look at the actual movement of that paddling, arm has to come up overhead, goes into water, and you've got to pull. And you got to do that with your chest up because you're actually securing the board a little bit more when your chest is up. So I've been told. So whenever I try to go out on my own, that's when I don't succeed often. But when I do, I really appreciate it. So so then having that shoulder mobility, and then working on cobras, working on thread the needles, working on that thoracic rotation, making sure that my neck is mobile because of all the looking that I'm going to do. My shoulders are rotating under my head because I'm looking where I'm going, and I have to be able to turn my body as I'm going down that wave. So cobras, thread the needle, push-ups with rotations, the world's greatest are some big exercises that will be involved more often than not when it comes to exercise selection for surfers.
What would you do to help someone? I mean, I know I know what I have done, but I find it fascinating on because you work with more clients that do this. But on the pop-up, what would be some examples of things that you would do for that?
Well, we could go with some traditional exercises. I know you've done a master instructor roundtable on the burpee. So
yes.
burpees, right? Getting from the ground to standing position. Great exercise for that. Mountain climbers, right? Getting those hips to move quickly, right? With your hands on the ground and you're exchanging your feet under you. You do it more from a conditioning standpoint, but a great exercise nonetheless. So if I were to look at two movements that you can do to help with that pop-up, so just mountain climbers, getting you to get used to moving with your hands on the ground while your legs are, exchanging position, but also the burpee. And I might put extra emphasis on the jump from the feet in the push-up position to getting close to under your shoulders.
I like it. So we've done the same type of things. I was just going to see where you were in comparison. I mean, obviously we would have done single leg squats, really working on balance, starting with the squat with the 3 to 5 second holds on the stabilization side. And then at that point, working in different environments, especially because the floor is a little bit different in comparison to the water, and being on an unstable surface, not knowing which direction, where like you said, the current is going to make it's going to be a huge factor. 1 minute you're floating one direction, next minute you're floating another one. And it was within, there were back-to-back minutes. And then the next thing you notice is there's a rip, the rip tide. And that's scary to see. If you guys have never seen that, looking from land into the water, it's one of those things where it's like all of a sudden there's waves coming in one way, there's this space of nothing, and then waves coming in another way. When you see that, get out of the water, because that is your rip tide. And it's scary, that current. If you've ever been stuck in one, it can be scary. So you obviously want to be very alert.
No, I've been caught in, and I'm swimming, and next thing I know, I look up and I am 3 times farther from the shore than I last looked. And I see this lifeguard, he's on the shore, he's waving in his arms, and he's pointing basically south for me, right? So he's pointing me to go south. And I am just swimming, and it was a haul. And then when I got to a point where I was out of that current, then he started waving me in. And now, like I said, I was 3 times farther than when I had last looked. And they were ready. They had their little flotation device. They were ready. They were waiting for me on the beach. But when I made it, then they're like, okay, he's all right. But I had to rest. I had to rest. So you have to be in some really decent shape. But from a safety standpoint, that's made me now consider where I put my things on the beach. I'm looking for a lifeguard tower, and I'm going to make sure that I'm within, quick running distance if something like that should happen. But
well, and they'll tell you don't fight the current. At that point, you just go with it, and then it'll eventually dissipate, and then you can come inward. Most people will start to feel like they're struggling. They turn towards trying to get out of the ocean, and when they do that, they're fighting that current, and then they're going to lose the battle by getting tired, and that's where there's a lot of problems. So if you ever get stuck in one of those, I mean, again, you want to be a strong swimmer if you're going to be out there, because that's a big thing that we were going to talk about. We're not just talking about surfing, but this could be bodyboarding. This could be anything that you're doing in the water. You want to also make sure cardiovascularly, where are you? How are you on your swimming techniques? How are you in doing this? But I think a lot of it, when we're looking at these inspired regimens, there's so many benefits of being in the water and dealing with that, being powerful, going against the waves and the currents, the constant jumping. I know with my son, we had a ball in the ocean because we're jumping the waves because it's fun for him. He's trying to do all these turns and spins, which I know there's, especially where we were, shallow waters, there's still some little snake, or not snakes, but sharks that are way closer than you may think. And, I mean, I used to be that kid that loved to play in the ocean, but I was also a pretty strong swimmer. So I felt like I could take anything on, but.
Excuse me. Sorry. Oh man. Sorry. Allergy season. So going from one board to another, we've talked about paddle boarding already. And I just want to, we brought it up, but I want to say that when it comes to paddleboard, that same client that I mentioned earlier who loved to surf and would wait for the big waves to come around, when he discovered paddleboarding, the first thing he said to me was, now I can surf every day out of the year, right? So he already lived for the days where the big waves would come in, but when the ocean's flat, that's when he learned, I can paddleboard. I can go out there. And the beautiful thing about that is that he kite surfed, he windsurfed, and he surfs. But when he found paddleboarding, the first thing I thought was, hey, here's a lower intensity version of what he loves to do. The guy already lives on a board, right? Kite surfing, you're fast. Windsurfing, you're very fast as well. Surfing, you're right there. Just the speed of the wave. But with paddleboarding, he could just take his time. Very low impact, low stress on his shoulders now. Instead of his arms being overhead, he can now keep him shoulder and hip height as he paddles across the shore, just beyond the waves. But here's another lower level intensity version of what he already loves to do, which is be in the water.
And when you look at the physical benefits, like you said, it is less impact. It's not as crazy. It's not as hard to keep your balance. But also when you're looking at the benefits psychologically and what it does for your psyche, there's so many positive things that show up under paddleboarding, because you're out in the water, you're in nature, you're doing something that's more calm and relaxing. So this is a big thing where people are like, oh, this is where you can do your mindfulness, is during paddleboarding. And if you've never paddleboarded, it's super fun. It's really not as challenging in comparison to something like surfing, because the water is pretty calm. And if you're not by an ocean, like I said, we've done it in the lakes, and it's a lot of fun. You can do it with your friends. You go out there and you can have a good time, and you don't have to be this experienced person on a board, because they have these paddle boards made specifically for beginners that help keep you upright, which I also think is good, because if you're always biffing it in the water, it stinks. Like,
right.
What fun is that?
Yeah, your board is as wide as a door, but at least you're stable. and not so much in the ocean, but in more controlled environments like a bay or an estuary or something like that. They'll do yoga classes on a paddleboard. So very, very, very challenging for balance, but a paddleboard does give you that option compared to being on a board that's meant to cruise down waves. So paddleboarding, I've got a good handful of friends that have paddleboards. So which is great for me because I don't ever have to buy one because I have 5 people I can call if I want to get out on a paddleboard. So very popular. I mean, if you go to one of those big warehouse stores, there's usually one on sale. So great sport, and chances are at least 3 people that have one.
Well, and another type of exercise we want to talk about is snorkeling. I know if you're taking vacations, which we've talked about the importance of that before, but if you're taking vacations, a lot of excursions involve snorkeling, especially if you're kind of out in the Keys or somewhere that's got nice clear waters and you can explore what's underneath the water and see things that you maybe would never see unless you decided to snorkel or even go into deep sea diving, which again, I've never done. Snorkeling I've done, but when you're looking at the benefits of that, you've got to use your arms, you've got to have leg strength. But the biggest thing too is what it's doing for your lungs. So obviously we're building strength within our lungs. We're having to learn to breathe into this tube in and out. So it's a different type of breathing. So learning how to regulate your breath and how, you're looking around and experience different things. It helps with respiratory strength. And sometimes I think we take that for granted, but if you've snorkeled all day, you're exhausted when you're done.
Yeah, I'll say, snorkeling is a great pass. Although if you don't have a rash guard on, just make sure that you or someone is there to help you put sunblock on your back, because you're face down looking into the water. A lot of times we forget that it's our backside that's actually facing the sun the whole time that you're in the water. So just from a safety standpoint, I know too many people, red shoulders, red mid back, great exercise, but take your precautions.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's also important. We talk about, Ken, you're lucky, you're by the ocean. I am in Atlanta. I don't live by an ocean. When I decide that I wanted to take a trip to the ocean, it's not easy for me to get to like it is for you, because you could just go and be there in just a couple hours by just driving. So if you don't have access to the ocean or even the lakes, one of the things I think is important when we're talking about these water inspired type of regimens, we're saying ocean, but just aqua aerobics. If you have access to a pool or you have access to any type of body of water, water aerobics is, while we think, okay, how hard can this be? You can make it as hard as you want, but I think it's low impact. It's something, especially we always talk, Ken, about doing maybe like a low intensity day or doing something to just kind of get our body moving, but not having it stress out the joints. Getting in the water is one of the best things that you can do for yourself or your clients. And if they're not into the aerobics, they don't want to do water aerobics, just the swimming part, how challenging that is for every muscle, including your lungs, especially if you change up the strokes. It's unbelievable. And it's a different type of exercise and workout that I know when I do, and I haven't really been swimming and I decide, okay, this is going to be my month of swimming. I'm dying after just a couple laps, but by the end of the season, I can do all different types of things because I've worked myself into it. So it's challenging more so than you think.
Yeah. And there was a time, Wendy, remember when we worked with that football team in the Under Armour America, where we had access to the pool. We used the pool in 2 different ways. They had to push and pull. We had them jumping or running in the water. So they had to, you're talking about 300, 250 plus pound guys, not 250, the number of guys, but pretty heavy guys. We're talking linebackers, linemen. But we had them running in the water. So they're moving their arms front to back. We're having them do leg lifts, running in the water, and they were gassed.
Yeah.
So that was it was like, just as, I mean, they're used to being on land, but you get them in a foreign environment. You go from on land to in the water, and they're pushing. We had them pushing against the side of the pool, and they had to kick as hard as they can. There was more water outside of the pool than there was inside of the pool by the time that they were done. But after about a 15-minute conditioning session, we had a 15-minute, all right, let's go ahead and take advantage of the buoyancy that the pool or the water has to offer, and let's go and do some recovery and regeneration. So now we were doing some stretches, and a lot of them felt like, man, whenever I do this on the field, they'll feel their knees or their low back. But I don't know how many of them commented that certain movements that they would do in the water, pain-free. So water, being in a controlled environment like a pool, can be a great workout or just a great way to regenerate. So just by floating, just hanging out, letting the water push up against you, and let your blood flow without putting the stress on your joints. So if you have access to a pool and you can do those things that I described, take advantage of it.
Yes. And Ken Miller and myself are talking on Random Fit about riding the waves of fitness, especially we're talking, we started with the ocean. We've talked about lakes. Now we're just talking about it. Just find any body of water and the importance of how, when you do exercises, how challenging they are, especially if it's something that your body is not used to. We talk about the SAID principle all the time. You get what you train for. But if you're doing something that your body hasn't done in a really long time, you're burning more calories. You're using different muscles than your body's used to. It's super challenging. But when you put water in place of land, it's also going to be less impact on the joints. So we're able to do things that we may not be able to do with some individuals that are having knee issues or ankle issues or shoulder issues, because the water is helping with the impact that obviously gravity and the ground are attributing to. So when you were talking about the All-America athletes, these are football athletes from all over the nation. There are 100 of the best that come and compete. We have 50 players on one team versus another. It's always on ESPN. Ken and I have been fortunate enough to work with these individuals. And so when we're talking about these players, we're not just saying random players. We're saying some of the best of the best. The ones that are getting ready to get drafted, or the ones that are going, full rides into some of these colleges. And so don't take the water for granted. I think my key takeaway is switch it up, but think about the cardiorespiratory or benefits, what it's doing for the lung capacity when you're challenging yourself underwater, when you're thinking about going out and doing some of these excursions, obviously safety first, but also picking up something new like surfing or paddleboarding. There's something for everyone. And it's something where you can do as a family, you can do solo. It's good for your body. It's good for your soul. It's good for your mind. It's, you're out, like you said in the very beginning, it's you and Mother Nature. You need to be smart, but it's something too that can be super beneficial in so many different ways.
Well, Wendy, I think you pretty much summed it all up.
Well, thanks.
But the biggest part for me is just you're out in nature. You have the sun, the sand, if you're at the beach, you have the wind. What better way to spend the summer if you have access, or if that's a place that you can go to. So just being in nature is recovery enough for a lot of people. So Wendy, thanks for sharing your insight. I really appreciate you sharing your stories and letting me know that floating is the best option for you out there.
Hey, when you can float, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, why do all that paddling and kicking when you get this?
Why do that when you can relax?
Yeah, exactly. So thank you everybody for listening to us here on Random Fit with both Wendy Batts and I, Ken Miller, on this episode talking about working out in the water. So if you like what you heard, like, follow, subscribe, download, and share. Let us know what you want us to talk about, and we will get that topic on in a future episode. So thank you everybody again for listening to us here on Random Fit. Until next time, take care and be well.